Okay, we are live. It is 2 o'clock my time. I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, and welcome to the show. So this is a very interesting session that I'm going to give today, and it's in light of Swift 2.0 that came out just this last week at WWDC. No, wait, Saturday. Came out this week. Okay, and I had some trouble figuring out how to present this, and I actually started with the trouble with my book. I started working on the book, and this is the way I like to present and give you guys information. It's in a step-by-step manner, starting with the simplest, and then you work your way up little by little, adding one more new thing, and then you learn that. Then you add one more new thing, then you add that. I don't like to give you guys like all the options and everything all at once. I know when I learn that way, I get overwhelmed, right? So today I'm thinking about earlier or yesterday, actually, I started thinking about, well, I want to present grids. And then there's a bunch of different types of grids. Hey, guys. George, hello. Ronnie, welcome back. Stefania, welcome back. Hello, John. Quessy, made it again. Hooray. Nice. So there's a lot with these grids now. There's so many different options that I'm like, I can't cover all of this all at one time. Cover it to the extent that I want to cover it, right? Kyle, Kilo Loco, he did a really great job covering it, and so did Paul. I watched his video too. They did a great job covering it really quick, but like I said, the way I like to teach it is little by little. And I realized with all these different options, it was impossible, because here's what you get. Okay, first of all, you have two grids. You have a horizontal grid and a vertical grid. And then each one of those have another 3 options that you can apply to them. So we're up to 6 different options now, right? Between vertical and horizontal. And then each one of those has different parameters that you can use on them. Not to mention there's different parameters that you can use on the vertical grid and horizontal grid. So we're quickly up to like 12 different options, right? And parameters that you can use. So it's a lot. And when you go through it real fast, you're just like, I don't know what to use anymore. So I wanted to avoid that with you guys. So what I want to talk about just today is I want to talk about horizontally, laying things out horizontally. And I wrote a whole section in my book, and I got rid of it because I realized this is the wrong way. I need to cover just horizontal first and then vertical second, and then repeat, if I have to, all the options. Because here's the thing about this. The options that you give to your horizontal or vertical grids, they're different. They respond differently depending on which one you apply to it. And it's a difference between like rows and columns and height and width. So the same parameter might apply to width for the horizontal grid. And the same parameter, same name and everything, will apply to the height if you're using a vertical grid. So in order to keep this simple, we're going to stick with just horizontal grids today. And let me catch up here. We have Junaid. I'm sorry, guys, if I pronounce your names wrong. You'll start learning SwiftUI now. So Andre, welcome, Andre. He's saying, or he's asking, how would you start learning SwiftUI now? As a beginner, I feel so overwhelmed by WWDC. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what can happen. And I would start with the basics. And I'd actually back up from that. I'd actually start with concepts. If you go through my book, I have a free book, Andre. If you want to grab it, I start with just concepts first. And then I get into just the layout views. And you learn just one. You learn how to lay things out vertically. Then you learn how to lay things out horizontally. Then you use the depth stack. And that's it. Start with those 3. That will get you like 90% of the way there. Anything you need to build. And a lot of stuff that was introduced into SwiftUI 2.0, there's a lot of extras. Like we can do collection views now, almost like grid views. We can do grid views now, which we couldn't before. But you don't really need that in most of your UI. There's other ways around it. So a lot of these new things that they introduce are great conveniences. But start with the basics. Don't try to overwhelm yourself. Don't try to learn it all at once. Just take it step by step. Also, Andre, go back to my first video in this series where I talk about blueprints. And that's what we're going to be using today. We're going to be using blueprints instead of building out a whole UI. Because if you create blueprints, that'll help you learn layout basics. Don't worry about trying to build out a UI. Start with layout. Get layout down. Okay. We also have Utan from Ireland. 2 a.m. Oh, man. All right, well, let's get started. It's been 5 minutes. I've been running my mouth off. Hello, Ron. We have Ronald from Linwood, Massachusetts. Sean Tucker. Great to have you with us, Sean. Okay. So what am I talking about when I say all these different options? Well, let's take a look here. And hopefully this isn't too small. I know some of you might be on your phone, but I tried to fit this in as best I could for all the different options. Before, when it came to horizontal layout, you had 2 options. And now you have 6. Okay, so the first question I start with is, when you're laying something out, is it just on one row? And if it is, then will it fit on the whole device? Because you could have a scrolling option, a scrolling horizontal layout, right? Where you're going side to side and you're just scrolling through some options. If it's not, then I go with the yes first. So if it is all in one row and it fits on the device, then just use an H stack. Now, someone asked me, what's the difference between a lazy H stack and an H stack? And before we get into anything else, let me guys show you the difference here. I've seen that question come up too. It's like, well, why? Let me create a different folder. Why would I use an H stack, a regular horizontal stack? Why wouldn't I just use the lazy H stack now? It's a good question. So let's see here. We'll call it just a H stack comparison. Let's get our canvas showing here. And I want a couple of different options, so I'm going to put it in a VStack, embed this in a VStack, and then I'll embed this in an H stack, just so we have something to work with here. Okay. Actually, let me do this. Let me use colors. Colors are push-out views, so we can see what they do here. Okay, 3 different colors. Actually, this might not be a good option. That's okay. We can work with it. This is my this is the machine. This is the computer that I do recordings on for my course, and that I do these live streams on. And this is a 2014 15-inch 2014 Mac with 16 gigabytes of RAM. So I should have probably booted it up earlier to get the canvas running. But it actually, it's still, once you get it up and going, it still works fine. What I'm going to do is, while we're waiting for that, I'm going to add more options here. So I'm going to add another H stack. And this is actually going to be the lazy H stack, so you guys can see the difference. Want to be, no, hold on. Might be faster to run it, right? There we go. Yeah, this is the beta Xcode. This is the Xcode 12 I'm using. I just want to see if it'll be faster if I just run it. You're welcome, Stefania. Okay. Well, while this is trying to launch here, this I should have. I don't know if I should go back or if I should have. Yeah, I should have probably just run this before. Oh, here we go. Okay, it's coming up. It's got to boot up. So let me just describe to you what the difference is, and then you can see it. So the reason why you might want to use a regular H-stack is because there's this concept that there's two different types of views. And this is my own categorization. To me, there's different types of views. There's push-out views, and these are views that take up as much space as they can. You put them in there like a color. A color is a push-out view. You define a color, and it just takes up all the space it can. Shapes are push-out views. And then there's what I call pull-in views, which means the view only gets as big as its contents, like a text. You put in text in there, and the frame around the text, it only grows as big as its contents, which is the text. So the H-stack and V-stacks, regular H-stacks and V-stacks, those are pull-in views. And you have the lazy H-grid, or the lazy H-stack, and the lazy V-stack. Those are push-out views, but they only push out in one direction. Okay, so when we're using a lazy H-stack, they're going to push out vertically. And, jeez. Oh my gosh, guys, I'm so sorry. This is taking so long. I didn't realize it'd be so taxing on my machine. So here's what I'm going to do instead. Let's do this. Okay. We'll come back to that and see if it's ready. All right. So imagine, here, let's do this. Yeah. Imagine you have a device. This is our phone. And you have your H-stack. Your H-stack maybe just has 2 items in it. And then, so when you look at the border of this H-stack, it will only be this big. It's only as big as its contents. So there's 2 items in that H-stack, and the frame or the border of it is only as big as those 2 items in there. So that is your H-stack. There. How do I spell that? Laxy H-stack. Lazy H-stack is a little bit different. What's going to happen with that is it'll do this. That's your lazy H-stack right there. The frame just takes up all available space. It pushes out. It pushes out as much as it can to take up all the remaining available space. Now, you might not want that in some cases. Some cases you might, but in a lot of cases, I probably wouldn't want that. So to me, the best time to use a lazy H-stack is if you're going out, if your H-stack is going on for a super long time and you start noticing a performance degrade, like maybe each one of those cells is like, let's go to the extreme, is an actual call to a database to get information and populate each one of those items in the stack, in the H stack, right? So if there's a lot of like processing that it needs to load all of them, and there's 1,000 or hundreds of thousands of them. Yeah, that's an unlikely scenario. But I'd go with the lazy H stack because only the ones that are showing are the ones that are loaded, or it loads only the ones that it needs. All the other ones, it won't load. So like, imagine there's more going out here. Let's say it's in a scroll view, right? Yeah, like this. Those, the ones with just outlines, won't be loaded until it actually needs it, because the user might not ever scroll. They might just ignore that horizontal scroll stack. So that's when I would use it. I'd use a lazy H stack if I need it, but I'd probably stick with H stack first. Okay, let's go back to these other options here. Oops, I'm sorry. Someone asked a question here. Oh, we have Mark from Morocco. Welcome, Mark. Junie, can you show how to make these views accessible, like grouping elements in these H stacks as one? Do you mean, thank you for the for the donation, by the way. So Junie, do you mean like how would I compose each, like for example, say we're looking at this, how would I compose each thing in the H stack, each item or cell, you might call it? Like if I had a V stack in each one? Let me know. I know these questions take 20 to 30 seconds to get back to you. Let's see how Xcode is doing here. My God. Oh my God, you guys, it still hasn't loaded up. All right, I might have to use my other machine. Okay, that was unexpected. I didn't think it would take that long. Oh, that's horrible. Okay. If I might have to end this early if I can't get Xcode to work. I'm super sorry about this, guys. But I really wanted to show you how these things work. But what we can do, how to make it accessible for voiceover. Oh, I got you. Well, to be honest, Judy, I'm not really an expert as far as that is concerned, but when it comes to voiceover, it uses elements on individual views to read things. And I believe it only reads what's on the screen. So, for example, if you have like this lazy H stack example, it's going to read those two cells that are visible, but I do not think it's going to read all the ones that it can't read the ones that it hasn't loaded, of course. So that's my guess right there. I know there's other modifiers that you can add, like label. You can add labels to a lot of controls. Not text. Text, it'll just read the text that's in there. But when it comes to reading things like a date picker or a slider or a switch or toggle, you can add a label to it and it will read that label. And you don't necessarily have to have that label showing either. You can show it, but if you think something else makes more sense to someone who's visually impaired, then you can enter some text in that label to have that read instead and not show it. Okay. Now let's talk about some of these other options. Let's go through another. That was just one option that you guys have. That's the wrong one. Here we go. So that's the top option right there. Should I use an H stack or should I use a lazy H stack? And the second one is, so let's go back and it says, does the whole row fit in the device? If it doesn't, if the row doesn't fit in the device, then you have another two options from there. Do you want it to snap into view? Now, what do I mean by that? That is called paging. And if you notice, like on the App Store, when you horizontally slide from one app to another, or one section or category of apps to another, it snaps into place. You might also see this with onboarding screens. They snap. You just give it a little flick and it stops at the next one. If you want that kind of behavior, then what you want to use is a tab view with page tab view style. And that's new in Swift 2.0. And that will give you a way to, I think that option is better when you're showing a large piece of content that you want the user to focus on, and you want them to swipe through and see just one thing. If it's, a lot of different options, like say if you have three, let's go with let's go to the grid concept, right? If you have 3 grid cells showing, I probably wouldn't use the tab view with the page tab view style. I'd probably just allow them to scroll through the whole section at one time, all the individual ones at one time. Okay, but if you don't want that, then you go back to using an H stack inside of a scroll view, because it goes off the screen. You want to see them and scroll them inside. Now, as far as performance problems, that I think would just take some testing. This is actually a test that I wanted to do a long time ago with comparison to a list and a for each. So we're talking about vertical scrolling here. You can use just a for each inside of a scroll view to create what looks like a table view, right? And the problem with using a for each inside of a scroll view is those cells, the rows that it creates, they're not like a UI table view where the cells are reusable. It doesn't, like the lazy H stack, right? It only loads them when it needs it. And that's the same thing with a table. It only loads those cells when it needs it. And it tries to reuse them because it's inefficient if it loads 1,000 rows and the user doesn't even scroll to them. So the idea of what table views do is they only load in what you see on the screen. And as they go off the screen, say if you're scrolling, if they go off the screen, then it takes those out of memory and it reuses them to show the ones at the bottom. So it's recycling views. And list will do that for you, but a for each inside of a scroll view will not. And I wanted to see how many could you put in a vertical scroll view with a for each. How many could you put in there before you start seeing performance degradation? And that's kind of like what I want to do here, because I think it depends on how much you're showing inside of each grid cell, as far as when you'll start to see problems or how they're loaded. So your option is, start with the H stack. If you only have 10 items, you probably won't see any problems. If you have 100 items, you probably won't see any problems. But you just have to test it and see how it goes. And if you run into problems, just switch to a lazy H stack. You have to consider the height, because it does push out. It is a push out view, a vertically push out view. So you will have to consider that and maybe put a frame on it or adjust it to fit within a space, if you're going from the iPhone to iPad. Okay, now, if you have more than one row, then let's look at the bottom options that we have here. So you want to use a lazy H grid. If you have more than one row, if you have 3 rows that you want going across, you'll need the lazy H grid. But which one? Here's where it gets tricky again, because you have 3 different options. It's crazy. So you want multiple rows. Should they be fixed? Should the rows be fixed? Now, let's take a look at something here, just to give you an example. I think it's the next slide. No, it's the one after that. This one right here. If you used fixed height for your grid items, they will not change when you go from device to device. If it's 100 high, if that fixed height is 100 for your grid cell, then it's going to be 100 on the iPad. It's going to be, if you're using this, if you're porting it, it's going to be 100 everywhere basically. It'll be 100 on all different iPhone sizes and all different iPad sizes, and you might want that. That might be exactly what you want, and that's where you want to use the fixed layout system. Now, if you don't want that, if you want it to be flexible, so that means you start with 100, but it can expand up to 200 if there's space. So maybe there's only 100 available space on an iPhone, but there's 200 available space on an iPad. Then, if that's the case, if that's what you want, and you still have a fixed number of rows, maybe you only want 2 rows. If that's the case, then you want to use flexible layout system. That's the second to the last one down there. Flexible size layout. And the last one is adaptive. What adaptive does, you tell it how big you want your cell. It might be, and you give it a range. You can actually fix it or give it a range. But you could say the minimum can be 20 and the maximum can be 100. But your whole grid has to fit within a 200 high grid. So what it's going to do is it's going to calculate for you how many rows it can create. And that can be good because if you have things moving on your screen, maybe your grid starts out at 200, but when you dismiss or delete something, it grows to 400. And then you want the items in your grid to readjust. So it might go from 3 rows to 6 rows. So that is my chart here to decide which one to use. I hope it's helpful. It is on my website right now. If you go to bigmountstudio/views, you can grab this. Now let's see here. Let's go back to Xcode and see if that's working. Yes. Okay, good. Okay, this is a bad example. Now remember, we're looking at the different options between an H stack and a lazy H stack, okay? This is a bad choice because these things inside of them are push out views. So let's comment these out. Let's go back to text. Okay. I'm going to take the text and I'm going to replace it on these too. Okay. So let's take a look at something here. When I click on this H stack, you notice there's a border around it. In the border, like I said, H stacks are pull-in views. They only take up as much space as their contents. In this case, that text, it only takes up that much space. And so you see the blue rectangle around it. Now, if I click on the lazy H stack, take a look at it. Notice it's a push-out view. It actually extends as high as it can vertically. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you want to figure out, do I need a lazy H stack or an H stack, this might be the deciding factor right here. To me, I probably wouldn't use it unless I need it. Unless I want that behavior of a push-out view. I could add a frame to this. You know, I could make it only as big as I need it to. Like, for example, come in here and give it a height. So maybe I only want it to be 50. Like that. But now, whoa. Oh, that was weird. There we go. Let's change it back to a lazy H stack here. But now here's the problem though. Think about like accessibility. If you want to use dynamic text and you want to put this on the largest text size, it's not going to fit inside the 50 anymore, right? Whereas the H stack, that frame will grow as the text grows. So it's something to consider, something to keep in mind. Okay, now what I want to do, restarting Xcode. Yeah. You know, Fuzzy, I should have done that probably. I can't remember if I did restart this computer or not after installing Xcode. So that probably wouldn't be a bad idea. And we have Yami Yugi. Welcome. Is Yami Yugi, is it Tim? I don't know if I remember that right. Okay. Now, one of the things I want to take a look at, let's do some exploration here. I want to go into Pinterest and start looking at some designs. And let's figure out how would we do some of these. Okay, let's bring this down here. I'll just search for mobile UI. There we go. And we're looking for something with like horizontal scrolling, okay? So let's see. Yeah, like let's take a look at this, for example. Not even horizontal scrolling, just horizontal layout. Now on this one, notice the bottom of the first screen down here has two items there, horizontally laid out. And those things, when it goes to an iPad, they probably spread out, right? So what would you use for this? Would you use a grid? Would you use an H-stack? Probably just an H-stack, right? And I probably wouldn't even use a a lazy loading H-stack. I'd probably just use a regular H-stack for that, just to lay it out. Now, if we look at something else, say we have this screen right here. And let's just see here. So you see in that first screen right there? Yeah. Okay, it is Tim. Hello, Pratik. Oh, we have Caleb with us. Yeah, I am loving him, Caleb. Guys, Caleb, he's a Swiftly Tilting Planet. He has a YouTube channel too. I've been watching all your videos, by the way, Caleb. Very, very nice. So, yeah, you can check out his channel too if you guys want. And let's see. So looking at this first screen, you see that first one right there, right? Aloe vera, $40. And the next one is Lusk Plant, $50. What would you use for there? I'm going to leave that question open while I talk about something else. Remember, if you haven't gone to my website yet, you can go there and take a look at that spreadsheet or that decision tree that I made for episode 4. And kind of like think about how the user would use this and what horizontal layout solution you would need for it. Okay, let's go to the next one below that. Below this, we have like a little menu here, right? Where it says plants, pots, and gardens. And for that, I'd probably, again, it looks like there's only 3 options. It doesn't look like it's something that scrolls off the side. So it'd be 1 row, no scrolling, H-stack. Okay, write your options up in the chat channel if you've figured out which one you would use for this layout, horizontal layout solution. The details over here, it's got 4 options. No scrolling, 1 row. What would you use? Probably an H-stack, right? Now, up here, let's talk about this one right here with these 2 options. I would probably use paging for this because they're big enough and it's kind of like the main content of your page. And as they swipe over, you want to have that stay in focus. So it snaps into place and they can view it. They can decide if they want to buy it or not. So I'd probably use the paging for this, the tab view paging option. So it wouldn't be a grid, wouldn't be an H-stack. All right, good. Let's look at some other options here. Oh, here's a good one right here. Okay, take a look at this one right here, where it talks about smart plants. I wonder if this is from the same designer. So it goes off to the side, right? And we might not know, or we might not know how much that can grow. And there's pictures on there, there's text on there, there's ratings on there. How much could it grow to? There is only 1 row, right? So what could you use in this case? If you don't want tabbing, if you don't want it to snap, right? Or not tabbing, paging. If you want it to snap in the view, yeah, I'd probably use a lazy H grid for this. But depending on performance, right? You could use an H stack inside of a scroll view. Or we could use a lazy H stack inside of a scroll view. But if we know, like if our data people, our database team is telling us, so this can grow up to like 400 items, then that's where I'd want to test it to see just exactly what the H stack can handle. And then, run it through instruments, do some profiling on it, see what your memory jumps up to when you scroll through all 100 of them or 400 of them. And if it doesn't work on your lowest supported device, then yeah, you can just go to a lazy H stack. Okay, I'm trying to find options with a grid. Oh, here we go, right here. All right. So looking at that second screen there, what could you use for that? Now, we briefly talked about this, but in this case, this is actually vertical. It's not horizontal. So this might be a bad example, but thinking vertically, we can kind of like switch around our options, right? And I plan on talking about vertically a different time, but we can talk about it a little bit. We'll cheat a little bit here. So there's 2 columns, fixed number of columns. Do we want it to always be 2 on iPhone and iPad? Maybe. Say we do. Say we want it to be just 2 columns. And notice each cell, each item inside that grid there, they're different heights, right? So we need something that isn't fixed. Fixed columns, 2 columns, and it has an adjustable or flexible height to it. So what could you use? Yeah, you could use, there's only one option. If those are the requirements, there's only one option. It's the flexible. You'd want to use the flexible V-grid. If it's horizontally, you have 2 rows, and the width of each item can be different, then you're talking about the flexible H-grid. Or there's no such thing as flexible H-grid. It is the lazy H-grid. I say flexible because those are your options. You have fixed, flexible, and adaptive. So again, adaptive, say the requirement for this was it could be 2 columns, or it could grow to 3 columns. Then you want adaptive. Adaptive will figure out how much space do I have available and how much does each column need. And then it'll figure out how many it can create. All right. So what do you guys say we experiment with this a little bit, create some blueprints, and kind of like look through some of these options here. Let's put this up here. Hey, Thomas, welcome. Ah, Norway. Man, that's one country I've always wanted to go to, was Norway. There's this place, it's probably a popular tourist place called, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Rhine or something like that. It has these amazing mountains. It's right on the ocean. It's beautiful. Yeah, I've always wanted to go there. Okay, let's see here. So the project that I have open right now, this is my blueprints project. I actually have a place where I keep all these blueprints. If you guys watched episode 1, I talked about this a little bit, where about my collection of blueprints. It really helps me test something out in a quick and efficient manner without having to develop like a whole UI around it. But I add just enough UI to get an idea of what it could turn into. Like Caleb, when Caleb was demonstrating paging, you're like kind of like creating a blueprint. You aren't creating a whole UI. You're creating just enough to be able to demonstrate a topic, and that's something I like to do. So that's what all of these are here. So let's create a new one, and let's see. We're going to talk about grids. So let's talk about fixed grids first. I think those are the easiest to grasp. So I'm going to say grid fixed. Specifically in this video, we're talking about horizontal grids, right? So let's create something like that. Let's resume this. And actually, let me look at something here to show you guys. The first thing we're going to talk about is controlling the number of columns in your grid, or the number of rows, rather. I'm sorry. So we haven't talked about this yet, but there's a parameter when you create these objects, lazy H-grid or lazy V-grid. When you create them, there's a parameter that you pass in that specifies row information for if it's a horizontal grid, it's row information that you need. For a vertical grid, what you need is column information. So you do that with one item, and it's called a grid item. So the very simplest way that you can use this is you just say grid item, no parameters, nothing to it. And if you look at that first example with your lazy H grid, if you want 3 rows, then you define 3 grid items. That's the absolute simplest way that you can use this. So a grid item just kind of like gives the grid more information on how to lay out each one of those cells, each one of those items, each one of those grid items. So we're going to do something like that. Let's see, I think I'll just create a VStack. And I'll just change this to fixed grid. Now, one of the things that you can do now is you can actually declare variables and run code inside of these containers like this. You know, this VStack is a container where you can add other views. We can add code to it now. So we can actually declare variables inside of this. So we want rows. And what I'm going to do, let me just add 1 for now, 1 grid item. And that's it. Start simple. And look at this. Source editor functionality is limited. Do you want to report a bug? Okay, now we'll create our lazy H grid. Okay, and you see the first parameter that we have here is rows. I want to know, like, what's the row information that I have to work with here? And we just want to supply our rows up above. Like this right here. Okay, now with this container right here, you can add static values. You don't need to connect it to any data. You don't need to connect it to an array. You don't need a for each in there to loop through a piece of data. You can actually put static data in there. So for example, you know, if I wanted a color, sometimes I start with colors because colors are push out views and it shows you like what exactly, how much space it's going to take up. So you notice I had color red here and like, look at the shape that I get, you know, by default. And so if I add a few more, you can see what it produces. It's pushed out. It's, you know, it's pushing out vertically, but it's weird. This is something I can't figure out, and maybe this will change. Why does it stop at just you know, like that height? Why does it stop? I don't know. We can give this lazy H grid a height to it, but it's just, I think it might be because it's in beta, and this might change. That's what I suspect. Also notice another thing too. If I click on lazy H grid, notice the frame stops actually right about here. I don't know if you guys can see that, but the view extends past it. Why does it do that? I don't know. Could be a bug. Let's see here. Yeah, this is Xcode 12. This is the beta. Hey, Kilo, I mentioned to you earlier. I was talked about how I saw your preview on grids, and it was like, that was my first one. It's like, you did like an awesome job. Glad you're with us. That's awesome. If you guys don't know, Kilo Loco, so I mentioned him earlier. He has a YouTube channel too, and he has really great stuff. I've been following him for years. I think since he started. Okay, so we're lazy H grids. Now this is just 1 grid item, right? And what we're talking about are rows. So if you want more than 1 row, then here's what you do. You just add another grid item. That is probably the simplest implementation to get what you want. You know, if you want 2 rows and that's it, that's fine. There's no flexibility here. And you can, remember, these can be anything, right? So say I want a rounded rectangle with a corner radius. Yeah, let's just go with the default there. Now what I can do is I can give it my own frame. So if I hold down Control Option, click on rounded rectangle, then I can say I want it to be 100 by 100. Okay, there we go. So it's 100 by 100. Now remember, these are static items, right? I'm not looping over anything. So I can add as many as I want. And if I add 3, you'll notice there's 2 rows, and the way it counts down is it starts at 1 up top, 2 at the bottom, then it goes up to the top again and starts with number 3. Okay, now that doesn't look very pretty, I know. But what you can do is you can actually, let's delete these again, the frames. And now we're talked about fixed, right? But we haven't used it yet. When we set the grid items to be fixed, it's actually a parameter inside the grid item when you instantiate it. So what you want to do is you want to say fixed right here. And then you want to give it a number. Now, let's just change this to 100. I want you to see something here. Okay, so I made each one 100. Why isn't it 100 by 100? Why is it only 100 tall? It's because when it comes to a horizontal grid, the only thing you're setting is the height. When you think of horizontal grid, you got to think of height. And think of it like rows, right? You're establishing the row height here. And that's essentially what you're doing is setting the row height. If you need it to be 100 wide, then you can set a frame on each of the individual items. So let's do this. Let's I hit the wrong thing. Control Option, you click on the rectangle, and then you can just say 100 for the width. And there you go. So I only set 100 on the first rectangle. Why is the second one going to 100? That's because views, or shapes rather, they're push-out views, right? So they're going to take up as much space as you give them. Now, since the one above it is 100, it's pushed out, that column to 100. So that's just stretching out to fill up the available space. Okay, now let's talk about something else here. And for this, I'm going to use a for each. And what I'm going to use an image, specifically an SF symbol. So I need system name. Then I want 1.circle, like that. Okay, so we have our 1 on there. This is kind of hard to read, so let me just see if I can increase this here. We'll change the font to large title. Make it a little bit bigger. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Command, click on Image, and I'm going to click on this Repeat option, and that will wrap it in a for each. I'm going to change the 5 here. I'm going to make it go on for, say, 21. Okay. And another thing I'm going to change is this item represents what you're iterating through. Right now we're iterating through numbers, right? So I'm going to replace that number. It's going to be 0 through 20. I'm going to replace that 1 in my image here with that. And now you'll see the numbers change. Actually, let me lower this for now. Keep it all on the screen. Okay, so this will also help you kind of like get the idea of how things are ordered horizontally. And remember, we're just talking about H grids here. V stacks, the order is going to be different. So notice this goes from top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom. Okay, and notice they're pretty far apart from each other. And why is that? It's because of the fixed height that we're giving each cell. So if we change this to 50, now it comes a little bit closer together. The top row is actually 50. The height of the top row is 50. And the bottom one is 100. Let me just catch up here. I don't know if you could demonstrate this, but let's say I have Z stack with an image and text on top. How do I change the position of the text? Yeah, that's Andrea. That's a different topic. But to give you a hint, the Z stack does have an alignment option that you can change to the top. So it'll move your image and your text vertically. It'll move them both up to the top. I hope that helps. I don't know if you want something different from other than that, but that's a start. Okay. Now, if we want to make these the same, we can. But just that, I want to give you guys the idea that there's options, right? So if you want different heights for your rows, you can do that. And you might want that. You might want something where maybe you just have a, well, I can't really think of a good reason why you'd want that, but you have that option. I started thinking, I'm like, nah, I think user experience wise, that doesn't really make sense. But there, you do have some options. Okay, now that's fixed. If you want more rows, then you can do that. And you know, the good thing about this is I'm not telling each of these items where to go. It's handling all that for me. I know there's going to be 3 rows. I don't care where they go. But SwiftUI is going to figure it out for me. Okay, now you might be asking yourself, okay, I have 50, or I have, you know, each row is 50 high, and there's some spacing in between there, those numbers, those circles. How could I increase the spacing in between the columns? You can't do that through the grid item. Remember, the grid item, those are just specifying rows. You know, what you want for the rows. But what about in between columns? You do that on the lazy hgrid initializer itself. There's an option on here. Actually, let me see something. If I hold down Control Option, does it show it to me in here? No, it doesn't. Okay. Yeah, there's a spacing modifier in here. You know, I heard all these great things about improvements to autocomplete, but haven't quite seen it yet. So we can add more spacing in between. Now remember, this is going to affect it on a column level. So there you go. So now that looks a little bit closer, more evenly spaced, right? This is another reason why I'm just covering horizontal layouts, is because I think if you get one down, then the other one will come a lot easier. If I try to teach both of them at the same time, which I originally was going to do, I was going to teach both at the same time, it's harder to keep track because everything's flip-flopped. Everything's switched around. Actually, you know what I had to do for myself? I can show you guys this too. I had to create a chart for myself of the options and what they do between the lazy hgrid. I mean, the lazy hgrid and the lazy vertical grid. Like the spacing, we just worked with spacing, right? And that's in the initializer. So on an hgrid, it pertains to the columns, a space between the columns. But on a vgrid, it's a space between the rows. For grid items, you know, when we passed in the grid items as the first parameter in the initializer, it tells you or defines how many rows you're going to have. In the lazy vgrid, it's how many columns you're going to have. You see? So they're all flip-flopped, but they change too. So, you know, we're talking about height, right? The fixed height. But there's another one where they flip around. Anyway, this is something that I'm going to put on the website so you guys can access this later as well. Okay, so I think you learned a lot about that right there. Now, another one which you might want to look into, and this is something that I don't have a good way to demonstrate this, but I want to talk about the flexible layout, where you give it a range of values that it can grow to. So let's do that next. Let's create that option here. Oh, that's awesome, Caleb. I find it doesn't always work for me. Yeah, it did take me a little while to get used to. But sometimes it doesn't show me my options. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to fix. I'm going to copy this as a starting point here. And then I'm going to make some changes to it. Okay, this is our flexible grid. All right, now the only thing I'm going to change, I'm going to keep the grid the same. And the only thing I'm going to change is the grid item parameters. So let's see, I'll hold down Option, and I'm going to delete these options right here. And then I'm going to say flexible. And there we go. Okay. Now with flexible, So remember, that is something that can stretch and take up the space that it needs. I think I have a slide on this actually. Yeah, right here. Okay, so we did the first one, the fixed one. Now, just looking at the horizontal grid here, you supply it with a min and max value, and that's how much it can grow. The height, that's how much the height can grow. You give it a range. Say you can grow between 10 and 100, or 40 and 50. And we kind of saw that with our, let's see. We saw that when looking at this option right here. You see those plants? So the height on those can change. And, you know, you just give it a minimum and a maximum range that it can grow, right? Yeah. That's good, Kilo. So he's talking about the a good way to demonstrate it is by changing the orientation of the device. All right, yeah, we can do that. Okay, so let's see here. So minimum for each one of these numbers, we'll say they can take up, let's start with 40 and go up to, let's do something extreme, like 120. All right, I'll change that for these two. And then 120. Okay. Doesn't look that much different, right? Because again, these grids, they're push out views vertically. So see, that's another thing that I don't understand is we saw that depending on the content, it can push out the height. So I'm just kind of like wondering where it stops. This might actually only be using as much space as the content. So maybe when the grid items are flexible, it's a pull-in view. Okay. Let's create a little bit more spacing here in between the columns. We'll change that to 40. And I don't know if this is going to run, but we'll try. Let's see, where's my simulator here? Oh, yeah, there we go. Oh, no, wait, I got to change my my starting screen here. I'm still using the scene delegate here. I haven't changed it over yet to use the app object here with the main property wrapper. Yeah, there we go. All right, let's see if it comes up. I wanted to ask you guys too. Does the sound, I have a fan blowing on me kind of like a little ways away. And I don't want it to interrupt with the microphone. My microphone is like right here. Do you guys hear any like rumbling or anything like that? Just let me know. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this around. And that's strange. I would have thought that it would have like came in a little bit. Maybe 40 is too much though, because it'll be 120. I would think that's enough. Let's shorten these up a little bit. Let's see here. Instead of 20, let's change that to, instead of 40, let's change it to 20. Let's run it again. No, this is not on Big Sur. This is still on Mac OS 11.5.3 or something like that. Okay, good. Thanks for letting me know about the sound. Oh, there we go. Okay, so maybe it was just the height. The minimum height was too large. So yeah, this looks like it's actually working well. You notice the spacing in between the rows grows, and then when you go into landscape, no, look at this. I bet this is a bug. I think it is a bug, because you notice when we started it in landscape, it worked right. Yeah, I bet this is. I'm going to say this is a beta bug, because watch this. We're going to start it in landscape. Looks great, right? And we switch it to portrait. That changed perfectly. But if we switch it back, no, it doesn't it didn't switch it back to the way it started. Okay, well, that's something to file a feedback to Apple about that. It could also be a simulator problem. That's the thing that's hard to tell. Maybe if we run it on a device, it'll work correctly. All right, so that is flexible. Now let's talk about adaptive. Adaptive is a super fun one because it will figure out things for you. And if you don't know how many items you're going to have, you might start with 5 and it could grow to like 100 over time, as a user adds things to your app. Adaptive might be the way to go. Or you might have something where, like, imagine this. Imagine you have something like this. Let's make it a button. Wait for that to catch up. There we go. So imagine you have an app like this where it shows 8 items on here. Most likely, not 8. It would show, let me add one more. And maybe that's all the room you have in your app for that space. And then you want to give your user a view all option. So when you click on view all, it fills up the whole screen. You may want to use adaptive for that because you don't know how big the screen is going to be. You don't know how wide the available screen is going to be. And you just want to say, fill up as many numbers as you can with a space given. So that's where you might want to use adaptive. All right, so let's go back here. Let's add a new screen here for us. And also, let's take a look at our decision tree here. Let's go back here. So kind of like going backwards. Well, let's start from the top. Is it one row? No, it's not. Then use a lazy H grid. Should the height be fixed? No, it can be flexible. Flexible height. Could be between 60 and 100. Okay, good. Is the row count fixed? Is it a fixed row count? No, it's not. So you can have as many rows as you want. And then that is where we're going to use an adaptive size layout for our lazy H grid. Okay, and actually, let me go back, copy the code we had so I can reuse it. Now, I think that's kind of like makes lazy, the adaptive layout maybe a little bit easier, is you only have to define one of them. And let me show you what I mean. Let's go here. So my rows, we're back to defining one row. And there we go. And you'll notice it switches to one row. Goes off the screen right now because it's too big. Does it really? The maximum, I believe the default is infinity. Yeah. That's a bummer. So they're just talking about the maximum, the minimum is a required parameter. Here, let me show you again here. This minimum parameter right here, that's a required parameter, but the maximum is optional. Maximum by default, I believe, is infinity. If you guys want to check, all you have to do is hold on Command, click on GridItem, and go to Jump to Definition. I use this all the time when it comes to learning about new items, or actually existing things that aren't new. If I want more information on it, sometimes you'll find information in here that isn't even in the help file. And sometimes you find misspellings too, which is kind of fun. It just makes you feel like, okay, I'm not the only one who misspells documentation. All right. Yeah, so let's go down to the initializer here. And we want, yeah, flexible. Yeah, the default. So you can see right here, maximum default is infinity. So if you don't supply it with a value. Oh, you don't actually, it says you don't even need a minimum either. You could just say dot flexible and it's minimum of 10. All right, so that's cool. Okay, adaptive. This is the next one we're going to work on. And you can see here, this might have been what I was thinking about. Minimum is required. You can tell if it's required or not because it'll have a value assigned to it. If it has a default value assigned to it, then it's optional. You can leave it out and it will use that value right there. So we'll do that with adaptive. We'll leave out the maximum, and by default, it'll use infinity for the. And remember, when we're talking about hgrids, lazy hgrids, what do these values pertain to? What do they talk about? It's the height. So when you talk about minimum maximum on an hgrid, we're talking about the height of the row, or height of the grid item. Okay, good. Let's go back to adaptive here. And let's specify adaptive. Now, just to let you guys know, to access these sizes here, you want to access grid.size, GridItem.size. And then you can see your options right here. So you have adaptive, fixed, and flexible. But you don't have to include those. So we'll just stick with that. Adaptive. Minimum, I'm going to say 20 again, 20 height. And for maximum, let's leave that off. Okay, let's see what it produces here for us. All right, good. So this is interesting, right? You notice, let me expand out here. When we use adaptive, it is a push out view again. And this is something that you'll just have to keep in mind and work with when positioning and laying out your screens. You might have to give it, if it's part of there's other components on there, other views on there, you might have to give it either a width or, have other things that push and size it for you. So this is cool. It's a push out view. And we really can't tell that it's even doing anything at all. Personally, when I look at this, it looks like a V-stack, right? So what we're going to have to do, first of all, you notice the circles are touching each other. We're going to have to increase the height of the row. So you do that with this value here. You change it from 20 to 40, increase the height of the row. Now, what I'm going to do just for this purpose, I'm going to actually constrain it a little bit. I'm going to put a frame on this so we can see the wrapping action. And I'm going to increase the number of items that we have too. I'm going to hold down Option Control, click on Lazy HGrid, and I'm going to give it a height here. Let's give it a height of 300. Oh, that was weird. That was really strange. I don't know what happened there. All right, maybe I'll just type it in. Okay, height 300. All right, there we go. So within that size, what it's doing is it's calculating what it has to work with. It says, I don't know how many rows I'm going to create, but I know each item is going to be at least 40 tall. That's the minimum, at least 40 tall. And I know I have 32 items. So how can I divide this up evenly with those numbers, and how many rows can I produce? So it produces 6 rows for us. And again, that's all, that's calculated for you. You don't have to worry about that or anything. Now, it'll change this on the fly for us by changing some of these. So let's say, each one was 50. Let me reduce our number of items here. Okay, there we go. So now there's only 5 rows because we're changing the minimum height. We want it to be larger. So this is pretty cool. And if we change, of course, if we change the height as well, you're going to notice it changes the number of rows. So it does all the calculations for you. And I think that pretty much covers everything I wanted to teach you guys or show you guys about these. And I hope this gives you a better idea that when you see UI or your designer gives you a UI of what he wants you to create, you can possibly use that decision tree to figure out which control would best be suited for that situation. Again, there's all different situations. We have new tools available to us. So you have options now. Before you didn't have options. And in a way that can be easy when putting together your UI. But hopefully this will help you. Now, again, we only covered horizontal stacks, and I hope just sticking to this one topic was good as far as like being able to conceptualize horizontal layout situations. I think that's all I can teach you right now at this point as far as lazy grids, horizontal stacks, lazy H stacks. Do you guys have any questions? Hey, see you, Caleb. Thanks for stopping by. Yeah, Kilo SwiftUI docs. Oh my gosh. Now we have David from Geneva. David, how's it going, man? I see your comments on my videos all the time. Thanks for taking the time to comment. So sorry about that, David. You came right at the end here. You might have to watch the replay. All right, if you guys don't have any questions, it was great seeing everyone here again. Thanks for joining so much for joining. Really had a great time. These are fun for me. Let's see. Can I correctly make one column and fill the screen on the iPhone and a grid on an iPad or higher with just one column? Will that one column? I get what you're saying. And then you scroll side to side and just see one column move all together. Yeah, you could probably do that. Here, we could probably show you an example here. What I'll do is I'll take away these numbers. Let me comment that out for a second. I think this will be better demonstrated if we use like a rounded rectangle. And let's see. So thinking about my decision tree here, this is Fernando that asked the question. Do you want one? Okay. Doesn't matter number of rows, right? Multiple rows, as much as it takes to fill in the device, probably. Yeah, then let's stick with adaptive here. Okay, rounded rectangle, corner radius, we'll stick with 25. Style, that's optional, we don't need that. Now, the height is already set for us. Okay, we're setting the height with the through the grid item. So the height is 50, and it can grow to infinity. So at least it's 50. Now what we want to do, I believe what Fernando's asking is he wants to stretch out that first column to fill up the screen. And what we can use for that is a geometry reader. I'm making an app that I want to list a list of items on iPhone and a shortcuts like grids on iPad. Shortcuts, I used that app like a long time ago, so it's not familiar in my mind, but I think I know what you want. Let's see if we can do this. So I'm going to add two things to this. I'm going to add a scroll view. We need a scroll view for this because it's definitely going to go off. And then we need a geometry reader. So let's start with the geometry reader first. Where is it? Here we go. Okay, that's going to pass in, a geometry proxy. I'm just going to abbreviate it with GP. Yeah. Then delete that. Let me fix the indenting here. And then I'm going to wrap the lazy H-grid in a scroll view. So usually what I do for that, I usually just embed it in like an H stack and then change it to a scroll view. We want to tell the scroll view that it's going to be scrolling horizontally. So instead of vertical, let's change that to horizontal. See, this is what I'm talking about right here. The autocomplete. Where's Adam? Or Caleb? Darn it, Caleb, he already left. Autocomplete is failing me. Show indicators. Yeah, I don't care. No, let's change it to false. Okay, content. Let's delete that. Okay. Well. Okay, I think we have everything we need here. Now, what I want to do, you remember the width of your items in your grid. Those are up to you, right? You need to you got to figure that out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a width on the view itself. I'm going to say frame, and then I'm going to give it a width. And the width, I'm going to set to be the same as I'm going to use the geometry proxy to get the width. So just say geometry proxy dot size dot width. I might have to subtract it to account for if I want padding in there. Actually, I could probably add padding around the geometry reader. Yeah, let's do that. Geometry reader. Let's just add horizontal padding there. Horizontal. Will that work? Yeah. So let's make this a little bit bigger here. That's strange that it doesn't go down. Maybe I have to give it a maximum. I'm going to set the maximum to also be 100. That's weird. How many items do I have here? 22 still. Okay. So let's try that. Let's see if that works. Zoom out here a little bit. I think this is what you're talking about, Fernando. Like this? Is that what you mean? Is that kind of like what you're talking about? I don't know why it's not going down all the way to the bottom. Oh, because I gave it a frame height of 500. Oh man, I'm such an idiot. Okay, there we go. All right. Yeah, I think this is what you're talking about, right? Fill up the whole screen and then swipe side to side. Now, probably what I'd use for this is I'd probably, yeah, thanks, Andrew. I really wish my voice and the chat was real time, like back and forth, because I have to wait like 30 seconds to, from when you guys hear me, 30 seconds have gone by. But probably, Andrew, what I'd probably use is the paging for this, to have it snap into place. Hey, Robin. Portugal. Wow, man, that's cool. My wife and I always talk about going to Portugal. She's, her last name, her maiden name is Madeira. Or her mother's maiden name is Madeira. And she always tells me that there's an island off of Portugal called Madeira. And she says that's where her mother's family came from. So we always wanted to go there. All right. So I think if there's no more questions, I'm going to wrap this up. Thanks, everyone, for joining again. And have a good day.